Hello and welcome to Guidance Review. Today we're going to be talking about enforcement policy for non-invasive remote monitoring devices used to support patient monitoring during the coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19 public health emergency. Here you can see the link to this particular guidance document. A lot of recent guidance documents are also going to be available if you search the FDA website. This just happens to be one of the most recent, probably relatively useful guidance documents for a number of you out there. And we'll go through, if we scroll down on this guidance document, just to give you a brief tutorial here, you can download the final guidance here. And something that most of you probably skip over, even those of you who are a little bit more seasoned with guidance documents, is this docket here, which, because this is a final guidance document, there's some information that's accessible here in terms of comments, and this particular guidance document, you can see, was revised as it says here. So if we actually go over here to check out the docket, we see that there are a number of comments here. There's some information in terms of primary documents and other information up top here as well. But just want to highlight this comment section here. And most of the comments here are not terribly useful. And I would just caution you, if you are going to make comments on a guidance document, be careful what you submit here. There's a lot of information that's been provided in comments that, as far as I can tell, should have been submitted to FDA in the form of a pre-submission. There's some guidance documents on that, and we might get into that later, not in this particular episode. And there are some comments, short comments that are made here. These are just a couple of the 79 comments that were made. And there are a couple useful comments here. And just want to highlight that you could go and if it would be of interest to you in particular, you can go check out some of the specifics. And this particular comment that I'll highlight is from the University of New Hampshire. And this particular comment was made by James Malley. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, who's a professor at the University of New Hampshire. And there are some technical comments that are made here by Dr. Malley. So these are the kinds of things, and there's a treasure trove of information here if you're willing to go and check out some of these comments, and some of them potentially just for your amusement. But we'll go ahead and go back here to the guidance document, and if we do that and we come down here, we can download the final guidance document. I've done that. And we can pull that guidance document up over here, and I've just pulled it up in my browser, and this will give you a PDF document that you can go through. And again, some of the same information is going to be provided in terms of the title, the date, the month and year here, and this tells you right here that this document supersedes this previous guidance that had been issued in March of 2020. And this gives you a little bit of information about who issued this guidance document. And then we get into the preface and public comment. This information is fairly boilerplate. So I generally recommend it if you're familiar with guidance documents. You ought to know by now, presumably, you can skip past this. But here, there is some information about who you can contact with questions. And I actually worked with Jessica Paulson when I was at FDA. So it's sort of an interesting shout out here for some of my former FDA colleagues. So if we go down here a little bit further, we'll see a table of contents and an introduction, background, scope, and policy, and a number of details here in terms of decision support software, monitoring related to COVID-19, and what FDA's current enforcement policy is for non-invasive remote monitoring devices used to support patient monitoring. So here we see again an introduction. In general, I mean, this is sort of a very high level to give you a sense of what has led FDA to issue this particular guidance. It's relatively self-explanatory in this case. The COVID-19 situation has led FDA to go ahead and release this guidance document. And then we get into some background on the respiratory disease outbreak of the novel coronavirus, and a little bit of information about what HHS has been doing. And just to let you know, there was some recent information, not necessarily about some of these guidance documents, but other guidance documents that FDA is on a schedule to release and is planning to release. Some of those do get delayed by some of the HHS comment and review period in the process that FDA is following to get these guidance documents out to all of us in the public. And so just to be aware, these guidance documents get a fairly high level review outside of FDA, directly and up into HHS, potentially, depending on some of the considerations and specifics within those guidance documents. And here we see the scope, and this is talking about enforcement policy. So this means that FDA is effectively waiving their rights to enforce the requirements. So the requirements have not been lifted. FDA is simply not enforcing the requirements. Okay? So, and this applies to legally marketed non-invasive remote monitoring devices, as listed in Table 1. So we can go down here and we can see what devices we're talking about here. And these are diagnostic spirometer, peak flow meter, breathing frequency monitor, apnea monitor, cardiac monitor, electrocardiograph, oximeter. Here are just a couple of the examples. And here you'll see the classification regulation for each of these, as well as the relevant product codes and the class. In this case, all of these have a separate or have a single classification. And here, as we go down, we see a little bit of detail and some links here in terms of classification. And that's a very useful classification database if you're not already familiar with that. And here we have some more. Again, we have a Class 1 exempt. And here we have a Class 2 and a Class 2 exempt. You can see that these two different product codes fall into, while they're the same class, one is 510K exempt and the other is not. And this final product code is unclassified. So that means FDA has been doing a big effort over the past several years to make sure that all of the remaining unclassified devices end up being classified definitively into Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3. And there are still a couple product codes and device types that remain in this unclassified bucket, but it's a lot less than what it used to be. And here we can see a little bit more detail on the non-invasive monitoring devices. These have the potential to be connected to a wireless network and to transmit the patient's measurements directly to their healthcare provider or other monitoring entity. So there are some considerations around around that information that's being communicated. And here's some additional information about these devices having the potential to apply algorithms that transform these physiologic parameters into some alarm or other, they say, novel index here that may aid a healthcare professional in a diagnosis of a condition. So FDA, it says here, has issued several guidance documents outlining enforcement policies for specific device types, some of which have remote monitoring capabilities. So you should be aware that there may be other guidance that's applicable if one of these other guidance documents that's been released also bears on the specific device in question. And the scope of this particular guidance document, again, is those product codes and classifications listed above in that table. And here we see the policy considerations driving FDA's thinking. FDA does not intend to object to limited modifications to the indications, the claims, the functionality, or hardware or software of certain non-invasive remote monitoring devices. So again, under enforcement discretion, FDA is allowing companies slightly more latitude than they would otherwise have had under normal operating conditions, specifically because of COVID-19. And again, limited to those products within the scope identified above. So here we see examples of modifications, and this may be directly relevant to you and your business. And we see that FDA is allowing hardware and software changes that allow for increased remote monitoring capabilities. So and then beyond that, here they have a note about cognitive assessment aids. And here they've called out the specific special controls that are applicable to these particular aids. And then we see here a little bit more detail about modifications to indications, claims, or functionality, and what FDA's intent is. And that they're really looking to foster a continued availability of safe and effective medical devices. So they're concerned about medical device shortages. We've seen that in some areas. We've seen some issues in terms of supply chain and being able to get products into interstate commerce within the U.S. From overseas, or problems in getting components for foreign and domestic manufacturers. So we've seen these kinds of things going on. And FDA is looking to make sure that we, as a country, have continued availability for safe and effective medical devices. So for the duration of the public health emergency, FDA does not intend to object to modifications to the indications. So just during the public health emergency, okay? And FDA currently believes a modification does not create undue risk in the following scenario, and they've laid out what that following scenario is. And examples of circumstances where FDA believes a modification would create an undue risk. So here are a couple examples below. Okay? And FDA recommends that the devices described in this guidance use labeling that helps users better understand the device. And that's a general requirement for medical devices. So FDA is not saying anything particularly extraordinary in that statement. And they do, however, call out a couple elements that they believe should be considered in labeling devices when you're making any changes. And then we see, as we scroll down, that for FDA cleared devices, they want to see included in the label, okay, information with a clear distinction delineating FDA cleared indications and claims from those that are not FDA cleared, okay? And for devices that were previously marketed for use only in a hospital, okay, that they want you to specifically identify the expansion, let's say, to include in-home use, etc. So they want you to be very clear about what claims are FDA cleared and which claims that you're making are not. And here they identify, they want to see a prominent notice. Here, this is number 2. And they have an example here. The following statement follows this recommendation. This device is intended to provide recommendations that should be used in an adjunctive, supportive manner and are not intended to be used as a primary mean to make diagnosis, prevention, or treatment recommendations. So FDA is looking for you to include prominent notices about the limitations of what it is that your recommendations are intended to be used for, and to clearly delineate that you have some new device performance or methods or potential risks, and that you've clearly delineated the FDA-cleared indications, and that you've also clearly delineated the use case scenarios. Okay? So here, when we look at the modifications to hardware or software intended to increase remote monitoring availability or capability, that for the duration of the public health emergency, FDA does not intend to object to hardware or software architecture modifications to devices listed in Table 1. That's again that list of pro codes and relevant device types that allow for increased remote monitoring capability. And they're taking into account the considerations described above, and they want to make sure that those modifications are not directly affecting the physiologic parameter measurement algorithms. Okay? So FDA recommends the following FDA recognized standards be considered in these changes, that you should do applicable testing and evaluation, that you'd validate your changes according to this list of FDA recognized standards where applicable. And in addition, they want you to consider management of cybersecurity. And that gets back to what we highlighted earlier in terms of some of the specific details in terms of patient information. There might also be access to devices, two-way communication sorts of considerations or vulnerabilities that FDA wants to make sure that you are considering as you are implementing these changes. And FDA has really been pushing quite a bit over the last several years when it comes to cybersecurity in medical devices. Okay, so and here they've given you a direct link to that guidance document, which is nice. If you haven't already read it, go check it out. And here we've got a little bit more information, a couple other links that FDA has provided here. Now, in this section, Section C, FDA gets into clinical decision support software. Okay, and so this might include mobile apps and may be useful in connection with monitoring for patients with COVID-19 or coexisting conditions and providing clinical decision support. Okay, so this would be where you're providing information to a clinician to help inform their decision about patient care. Okay, you're not actively making a closed-loop decision, but you're supporting the clinician with information so that they can make an informed decision around patient care and a treatment. So here there's a little bit more detail laying out what I just told you. And specifically, here's what the section excludes. And if you meet all of these 4 definitions, then you can be considered outside of the scope of a definition of device. But again, you need to meet all of the following 4 criteria. Okay. And the following are examples of non-device functions. So here specifically again are non-device functions under Section 520. And here are listed 4 bullets. And then FDA has provided some additional online resources they believe may be helpful regarding digital health policies. And this is seemingly a relatively comprehensive list. You let me know in the comments if they're missing anything that you would have liked to see in this list, but I think this is fairly comprehensive. So that wraps it up for today. I really appreciate your time and your attention, your interest in talking through some of these kinds of things with me, walking through this and sharing your thoughts, your feedback. down in the comments. I really appreciate, again, I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.